here. I want to welcome in Maha Yahya, the director of the Carnegie Middle East Center from Beirut, our chief national security correspondent, Alex Marquardt, who knows this region very well indeed, and our military analyst, Cedric Layton, who has been with us for the last 37 minutes or so. Maha, to you first. You're in Beirut. Just give me a sense of what you're hearing, of what you're understanding from your contacts, your sources on the ground.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. It's quite distressing. There's a lot of anxiety. I mean, the city's been in a state of heightened anxiety for the past since the unfortunate and horrific attack in Majd al-Shams. Tonight, everybody's just back at home, waiting to see what's going to happen next. I think everyone was hoping, we were very much hoping that Israel would not attack the southern suburbs of Beirut, that they would stay away from densely populated civilian areas, because then that is going to probably solicit a much stronger response from Hezbollah than would have been the case had the attack happened in a less populated area against a weapons depot, etc. So there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of concern, there's a lot of worry. Now, the fact that Hezbollah is saying that the strike did not succeed in taking out Fuad Shukr, who apparently was the target, may lessen the impact a little bit, but not a lot, because we're hearing of at least 10 injured and 10 civilian injured and two killed so far. And most likely the toll will go up given how densely populated the area is.
Yeah, and we had seen Ben Wiedemann, who's on the ground, as you all know, was talking about this. There had been reports that this Hezbollah official the senior commander hadn't been killed. Now we're hearing from our Ben Wiedemann on the ground saying exactly that, the senior Lebanese government contacts basically saying that Fuad Shukr has escaped. So I wonder whether that changes the calculus here. Let me go then to Alex Marquardt, because Alex, you know this region very well. We heard from our Ben Wiedemann that this happened just before 8 p.m. It would have been busy. This is predominantly Shia, densely populated. What do you make of this moment? How Hezbollah, if Hezbollah will retaliate, you know this, you've reported on it in this area, in this region. How do you see it playing out?
Well, there's certainly an expectation that Hezbollah would respond, but in speaking with officials over the past few days, as this response was expected, there was a hope that Hezbollah would read the Israeli response in a way that they would respond rationally. So the big question now is whether this official has been killed. And I just heard those reports that he has not. I should note that Fuad Shukr, if he was indeed the target, he's not just wanted by Israel. He's officially wanted by the United States as well. He's on the U.S. State Department's Rewards for Justice website with a $5 million bounty on his head. If he was not hit and killed by Israel tonight, does that then begs the question, will Israel go farther? I think what Israel is trying to telegraph here in what is a very precise strike, albeit in Dahieh, in the Hezbollah stronghold in Beirut, is that this is possibly the extent of their goals. If they were to go broader than this, if they were to target civilian infrastructure, if they were to go after the center of Beirut or the airport, then you could certainly be in a situation where we'd be very worried about an expanding conflict. But what we've been hearing from U.S. officials in the lead up to this and since this strike happened is that they don't seem terribly worried that this is going to spiral out of control. Just yesterday, the White House's John Kirby saying that fears of that expansion are exaggerated. In the moments following the strike, we again heard from the White House, from Karine Jean-Pierre in the White House press briefing room, saying it is not inevitable that this turns into a larger conflict. So they do appear to be relatively confident that this will stay contained, at least for now. But of course, Isa, as you know, so many uncertainties.
And you mentioned the White House and Karine Jean-Pierre. In fact, we have that sound. I'll play it out and we can talk after this. Have a listen.
Has to be reaching out again to Israel in the wake of this strike to...
So, look, I don't have...
think if for some reason it froze, we are going to try and fix that problem. But you heard it, and you heard it directly as well from Alex, who was listening in. And Alex, we heard from sources telling CNN that the White House was given the heads up, I believe, right, from Israel. Why is that important? Why? Just add some context here. Why does that matter?
That is right. I mean, that is always one of the first questions that we here in Washington ask to U.S. officials, to what extent they're aware of Israel's plans, and they're not always aware of Israel's plans. Of course, these are two very close allies, but the U.S. and Washington are not always kept abreast of what Israel is planning. In this case, according to our colleague Jennifer Hansler, there was a message sent via security channels from Israel to the United States that this was going to happen. It's unclear when that message was sent, but this is a good sign that Israel is keeping the U.S. abreast of what it intends to do, and likely is an indication, certainly when you hear what Karine Jean-Pierre then said, that this might not escalate farther. This has been the nightmare scenario, Isa, that one of these Hezbollah rockets would hit Israeli children and cause this situation to spiral out of control. What I've been told by officials in the past few days is that they believe this was an errant Hezbollah rocket, that this was a mistake, that rocket that hit and killed those 12 children in Majd al-Shams. And of course, it's worth noting that this is what is considered internationally as Israeli-occupied territory, and the Druze community there, in many ways, rejects Israel and rejects Israeli citizenship. But Israel certainly saw this as an attack on Israeli territory. And then we heard Prime Minister Netanyahu threaten what he called severe retaliation. What we're seeing now, is that the extent of it, or is there more to come? We have to wait and see.
Yeah, that is a big question. Look, I've promised our viewers, Alex, that we'll bring that sound from the White House. We're going to have a go at it again. I think we fixed the technical issue. Let's have a listen.
So we do not believe that an all-out war is inevitable. That is not something that we believe, and we believe that it can still be avoided. This is a president, as you've watched him the last 3.5 years. He believes in diplomacy, diplomatic solutions, especially as we're talking in this moment along the blue line. That is true as well. And so, and that will end these attacks if we have some diplomatic kind of solution from Hezbollah once and for all, and allow Israel and Lebanese citizens on both sides of the border to return to their homes and live in safety. And that's what we want to see. So that's what we believe. There's a diplomatic solution here, and that's what we're trying to get to.
And Alex, just to wrap up what we just heard there from Karine Jean-Pierre, I mean, we do not believe that an all-out war is inevitable. What is being done behind the scenes in the United States to try and lower the temperatures here to stop this from escalating?
There is a fierce diplomatic effort going on, Isa. We often talk about the efforts to get to a ceasefire in Gaza. There's a parallel, simultaneous effort led by an official named Amos Hochstein, who has been shuttling back and forth between Israel and Lebanon for the past few months, trying to get to a place where there is quiet. Now, so much of it is believed, hinges upon the war ending in Gaza. But Israel certainly wants to separate those two, essentially, and see an end to the fighting up there in a way that those tens of thousands of Israelis can return home. We should note tens of thousands of Lebanese citizens have also had to move away from the border. The outlines of a deal that has not yet been accomplished are that Hezbollah would move back from the southern border of Lebanon about 6 miles or 10 kilometers. But at the same time, when you see the intensity of the cross-border skirmishes, there is concern that Israel is simply going to say, well, diplomacy doesn't work. We need to go in militarily, whether that's on the ground or from the skies, and that could precipitate a war that would be very, very different from the one we're seeing in Gaza because of the staggering arsenal and capacity that Hezbollah has.
And there have been some voices, of course, within the Israeli cabinet, the sort of more far-right voices who perhaps have been calling for that pressure on Hezbollah and this moment. Let's stay with that, Alex. I want to go to Maha, who is in Beirut. I believe she's still with us. And Maha, we have heard from Israeli sources basically telling CNN, I'm going to quote them here, we don't want this to escalate into a wider war. And ultimately, whether this escalates or not very much depends on how Hezbollah reacts now. Just give us a sense, Maha, of the mood of the Lebanese people that at this moment, because we have been seeing tit for tat now for several months, and this is one of the biggest fears, of course, that this escalates into to a wider war. What are you hearing in the streets? What are people telling you?
I think people I mean, the Lebanese are very worried about another war. Don't forget, 2006, there was a 33-day war between Lebanon and Israel. Israel has invaded Lebanon multiple times, 1982, 1978, 82, 96. So it's been recurrent. So there is a lot of concern and fear that this may happen. There's also a lot of cynicism about Israel using the horrific attack in Majd al-Shams for its own purposes, to try and get rid of a commander or target an area that it has not targeted in the past. Primarily because, as Alex mentioned, this is occupied territory. Internationally, it's an occupied Syrian territory. Many of these children or the residents of Majd al-Shams don't even have Israeli citizenship. So there is a lot of cynicism around that. There are more than 20,000 children who've been affected, at least in one way or the other, in Gaza over the past 8-9 months. On the part of Hezbollah, their calculus is they really do not want to escalate. They understand that an escalation in the conflict, to quote the Israeli defense establishment, can easily send Lebanon back to the Stone Age, and it will affect all Lebanese, not just Hezbollah areas. I think on the part of Israel, and we've seen that over the past, again, almost now 10 months, we've seen that on the part of, in the way they've responded. Israel has been carrying out targeted assassinations. Almost 400 members of Hezbollah have been killed so far. And the retaliation has remained within certain limits. I think...
Go ahead, finish your sentence. Go ahead, Maha.
Okay. On the Israeli side, I think the calculus is somewhat different. There are tensions within the cabinet between, you have a prime minister who needs the continuation of war in order to maintain his political credibility, but you've also got tensions within the cabinet between, for example, Gallant, who wants to have, war with Lebanon, thinks this is an opportune moment to get rid of Hezbollah. But quite honestly, they're not learning from history. History has shown us, and very recent history, not late history, is you cannot get rid of organizations like this through military means.
Maha, really appreciate you adding the context and the analysis, of course, from the region on the ground. Appreciate it. As you were talking, we had some news coming in. The high-level Hezbollah commander we've been speaking about in the last 50 minutes or so, we have now learned that he has survived that strike. His name is a high-level Hezbollah commander, Fouad Shukur, has survived the strike that targeted him in the southern suburbs, as we're showing, of Beirut. We will talk about this after the break, because I wonder whether that changes the calculus at all. We're going to take a short break. We'll speak to Cedric after this short break.